Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Today I'm going to be speaking to you about the challenges of communication and brain injury. Some of the topics that I will be including will be the challenges around communication, learning how to communicate differently, being mindful of ourselves, one's ability to self-regulate, challenging behaviors and communication, learning and moving forward, providing some communication tools, and setting expectations. When a family member or a loved one has suffered a traumatic brain injury, many challenges arise, and one of the main challenges is communication. How do we communicate effectively to the ones we love and care for? How do we learn to listen without responding right away? How do we communicate our own feelings and needs? And how does the person's head injury impact their communication needs as well as our own? This starts with your own self-regulation. Monitoring yourself to determine how what you might be doing is impacting the communication between you and the one that you're caring for. Consider the environment in which the communication is taking place. Is it conducive for a short exchange or a more in-depth conversation? How much information can the person process at that one time? Be mindful of any changes in mood or emotions, because these are important factors that can affect how the communication is happening and how the person is able to listen to you. Feelings and emotions often impede our ability to listen and accept what is being said to us and how someone's responding. If a person's mood is low, how much can they actually tolerate in that moment? So it's important to gather information as much as possible to determine if there are other variables impacting someone's day, because this will affect their communication, such as fatigue or pain or anxiety, lots of factors. And take a step back when necessary to avoid any type of conflict or behavior that might hinder effective communication. The way we approach a conversation or a topic or ask a question or give a direction can directly affect how someone might respond to you. So being mindful of your tone of voice, your body language, your demeanor, your own mood will contribute to how well someone might receive you by another person, providing that you're providing care for. Consider all the factors that could potentially impact your loved one on a daily basis, and then consider how the same things might impact you, such as fatigue level, fluctuations in mood, feelings of anxiety. Someone might have a super stressful day or a super stressful moment. If they're sick or in pain or simply exhausted by the end of the day, those would be factors in determining when is the right time to have communication. And being mindful also of your own ability to step back and self-regulate so that the communication can be effective and you won't experience breakdown. There are certain times when I'm sure you experience feeling out of control or overwhelmed, and this is precisely when you need to take a step back, even if only briefly, to regain some control and be able to continue to communicate the way you want to. So some of these examples are strategies that are necessary for when you're caring for another person, to ensure that you're also able to manage your own mood and emotions, because it will affect how well someone can communicate and how they're going to respond to you. Now, when there is breakdown in communication or dysfunction, which often can happen, a range of behaviors can occur. The person can just stop listening to you and ignore you. Or other behaviors can escalate where someone becomes verbally or physically aggressive because they don't like or can't tolerate what you're saying. So these things, as a provider, you have to be mindful of. What can you do to try to minimize these types of behavior reactions? Number one, as hard as it is try to remain calm. And if you can't remain calm, then it's important that you remove yourself from the situation, even briefly. If the person you're caring for doesn't know they need some space, then you give it to them. Simply say, I'm sorry, I see you're upset right now. I'm going to give you a few minutes before we can continue this conversation. Having that self-awareness, What are you doing? Are you coming across the way you want to, or do you need to step back? Oftentimes when people are upset or frustrated, they just want to be validated. They don't want you to be commenting right then or giving an opinion. They just want to be heard. And setting those clear boundaries and limits when it comes to communication standards. If you don't accept or want someone yelling or swearing at you, then you have to make that very clear and don't engage in that conversation. Prepare for these situations. Certain topics can become triggersome, and therefore you know your family member is going to react. This is where pre-setting becomes very beneficial, where you say to the person, you know, we're going to talk a little bit this week about getting you a bit more independent. They might not want to talk about that, but you're providing a preset to help prepare them for this type of conversation. Now, I tried to provide some examples of situations that you guys might experience. And just to give some brief strategies for them. Perhaps the person you're caring for, you're having a conversation, they're starting to yell at you or become verbal, or they're making hurtful comments. This only escalates if you try to calm them down verbally or point out what they're doing that's wrong. Typically, that's not a good thing. This is where space needs to happen. I see you're upset, I'm going to give you a few minutes and then I will return. The person might have misinterpreted what you've said because their thinking ability is very concrete. If they've misinterpreted what you said, you need to try again. Perhaps simplify the language or just change your approach. Maybe make it a little bit more passive and not so direct. You want to talk, but the timing is not good for your partner. That's difficult because that's a change since the head injury, but that might mean that a good conversation can't take place at the end of the day because your loved one's exhausted. They can't handle or tolerate it. You are not understanding why your loved one is feeling a certain way, or they're not understanding how you're feeling. Unfortunately, this happens, but we can't dismiss how someone feels as how they feel. But by validating that and saying, I understand that you're feeling upset, even if you don't understand why, helps the person feel that they've been heard. Sometimes an issue you think has been resolved gets brought up repeatedly, which becomes very difficult when you're trying to deal with one topic and several other topics continue to be brought up. You have to learn to be able to set the example to let things go so that you can focus on that one topic at a time. All conversations quickly lead to heightened emotions, arguments, or severe behaviors. This is more on the extreme end of communication breakdown. But when this happens, if you're participating or trying to stop it, it's not going to work. The person needs space, you need space at that time as well. You feel that you aren't being heard as the care provider. This is difficult, but it will happen. So perhaps the delivery in your message has to change, or someone else has to be addressing that specific topic that the person just can't tolerate listening from you. Every day feels repetitive, the same conversations, the same reactions, or you feel overwhelmed and uncertain that anything is going to improve or get better. If this is the case, then it's an indicator that something different has to be done with the communication exchanges for it to improve. Oftentimes, certain conversations will trigger behaviors or unpleasantness, and you've probably become very familiar with those things are. And this can result in a lot of emotional or conversation breakdown. So trying to highlight positives before giving feedback is very important, so the person isn't interpreting it as negative or becoming defensive in terms of what you're saying. Consider alternative ways to approach something if the initial approach was unsuccessful. And are there specific topics that could be addressed by someone other than you, if it's around self-care or their schedule or something of that nature? And this allows for certain predictable behaviors to be avoided. Now, learning and moving forward. We've learned that listening is an actual skill, and it's necessary to ensure that you understand how the person you're caring for is thinking and feeling. If you have a conflict or argument and the communication did not go the way you wanted or expected, then it's time to try a different way. And if your initial approach was not successful, you try a different approach. When you repeat the same actions and you expect a different result, it again indicates that it's time to change something, and oftentimes this can be a bit of trial and error. As difficult as this one is, you have to try not to be so hard on yourself as the care provider. Remember that everyone is learning as they go, including the professionals that are giving you the advice. It's important to try to let things go that have resulted in conflict or hurt feelings in order to move forward with effective communication. And when emotions become heightened, although it may be difficult, try not to take things too personally, knowing that the head injury is impacting how someone is trying to communicate with you. Remember, the main goal behind using different ways of communication or strategies is to make things easier for both you and the person that you're caring for. So how does one communicate effectively in these types of situations? As mentioned before, you have to consider the timing and the environment. Is the timing of the conversation conducive, or is the environment too overstimulating and distracting? Is it appropriate to give feedback right then, or should you wait, or ignore kind of what the person is saying, bring it up at a later time, or redirect the conversation to avoid conflict in that moment? Consider everyone's mood and emotions. Your mood and emotions, how are you feeling? That's going to impact how you're speaking to someone and how they're going to receive you. If a person is angry, it's not a time to have a conversation. You have to wait, give them space. If the person is irritable, well, information still has to happen, but shorten the amount of information at that time because the person can't tolerate more. And if someone's upset, then you need to give them space to calm down. Or in turn, you might be upset, you're not ready to talk. Sometimes that space piece is extremely important. So some of those communication tools that you can use every day to help you is, again, taking that step back and being mindful of your tone, of your volume of voice. It's all in the delivery of the message that you're giving. So if you're a little bit too loud or you're speaking too softly and the person is just not responding, then try to change it. Being very aware of your body language. What nonverbal communication are you using? The level of assertiveness, the level of passiveness. What is going to work for your family member in that situation? Oftentimes using simple language and giving concrete messages is important, better than having a lengthy conversation. And at times, if memory is a factor, then those messages need to be repeated maybe more than once throughout the day so the person can retain what you're saying. Remaining calm, of course, easier said than done, but you can always leave for a couple minutes or turn your back to give yourself space so that you're being very aware of the behavior triggers that might follow. Timing of lengthy conversations. It can't happen at the end of the day. People are exhausted. They're usually not equipped to manage that at that time. And again, as I said before, starting with some positive validations before giving feedback often is better received and puts the person less on the defensive side than if you're pointing out the things they need to change. Pre-setting communication expectations. If you don't want to be yelled at during communication exchanges, you set that as a boundary and you don't participate in the conversation if that's going to happen. The more you do that, the more it sets a standard and the person can form healthier habits as well as you. And importantly is being consistent, because the more consistent you are in your approach that works, this helps maintain effective communication skills. This is how we set expectations for both ourselves and the person that we're caring for. Learning what works best for the people that we're communicating with. Understanding the reactions you get to determine the approach that you should use. And giving yourself a break and taking time from exhausting situations and finding another time. It's not always important to discuss something right then and there. Remembering that fewer words still get the message across, often more effectively. And validating a person's feelings. Again, sometimes people just want to vent and be heard. They don't want you to comment or they don't want you to offer an opinion right there. Doesn't mean you can't at a later point in time when they're feeling better. And acknowledging those positives prior to giving back feedback with changes or things you want improved is very important. Setting those clear limits and boundaries for acceptable communication, whether it's, I don't want to be yelled at, or I don't want you to hit me, otherwise I can't have this conversation with you. Knowing that taking space for yourself is a good thing when there's communication breakdown. Learning to listen without responding. As I said, oftentimes even you just want to be heard or validated. Label a person's feelings to help them and yourself identify when certain behavior reactions are occurring. And consider the environment before speaking to ensure that your surroundings are not interfering or overstimulating or too distracting. Be sure to take care of yourself in this process, as was mentioned this morning, in order to give you the necessary mental and emotional strength that's needed on a daily basis. This brings us again to the importance of consistency. When a communication strategy has been found to be successful, it's best for it to be shared by everyone, so as to help the person you're caring for adapt to certain communication standards and form healthier habits, as well as yourself. And trying not to react and take space when there is communication breakdown will often help diffuse situations or prevent them from escalating further. And importantly, both acknowledging and knowing that you guys are doing the very best you can, and that things can and they will get better. And that concludes my topic right now. Thank you.